Feeling my way through the darkness, guided by a beating heart. I can't tell where the journey will end, but I know where to start. They tell me I'm too young to understand. They say I'm caught up in a dream. Well, life will pass me by if I don't open up my eyes. So that's fine by me. So wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser and I'm older. All this time I was finding myself and I didn't know I was lost. So wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser and I'm older. All this time I was finding myself and I didn't know I was lost.
How did that prepare me for my future?
We took a survey of 100 high school students and asked, do you know what you want to be when you are older? If yes, do you believe what you learn in high school prepares you for that career? The results were nothing less than what we expected.
Right now, there is a kid finishing parents' evening in a heated discussion with his mother, saying, why does he have to study subjects he will never ever use in his life? And she will look at him blank-eyed, stifle a sigh, think for a second, and then lie. She'll say something along the lines of, you know, to get a good job you need a good degree, and these subjects will help you get a good degree. We never had this opportunity when I was younger. And he will reply, but you were young a long time ago, weren't you, Mum? And she won't respond, although what he implies makes perfect sense, that society's needs would have changed since she was 16. But she will ignore him, grip his hand more sternly, then drag him to the car. She will lie, simply because she does not know any better herself. Although her whole adult life she has never used or applied Pythagoras' theorem, pathetic fallacy, and still does not know the value of x, she will rely on society to tell her that her child, who has one of the sharpest minds in the school, is hyperactive, unfocused, easily distracted, and wayward.
Our children are living in the most intensely stimulating period in the history of the earth. They're being besieged with information and calls for their attention from every platform, computers, from iPhones, from advertising holdings, from hundreds of television channels. And we're penalising them now for getting distracted. From what? Boring stuff. At school, for the most part. There's a great study done recently of divergent thinking. Published a couple of years ago. Divergent thinking isn't the same thing as creativity. I define creativity as the process of having original ideas that have value. Divergent thinking isn't a synonym, but it's an essential capacity for creativity. It's the ability to see lots of possible answers to a question, lots of possible ways of interpreting a question, to think what Edward de Bono would probably call laterally, to think not just in linear or convergent ways, to see multiple answers, not one. So, there are tests for this. One kind of cod example would be, people might be asked to say, how many uses can you think of for a paperclip? One of those routine questions. Most people might come up with 10 or 15. People who are good at this might come up with 200. And they do that by saying, well, could the paperclip be 200 foot tall and be made out of foam rubber? Does it have to be a paperclip as we know it, Jim? Now, there are tests for this, and they gave them to 1,500 people. This is in a book called Breakpoint and Beyond. And on the protocol of the test, if you scored above a certain level, you'd be considered to be a genius at divergent thinking. Okay? So my question to you is, what percentage of the people tested, of the 1,500, scored at genius level for divergent thinking? Now, you need to know one more thing about them. These were kindergarten children. So what do you think? What percentage at genius level? 80. 80, okay. 98%. Now, the thing about this was it was a longitudinal study. So they retested the same children 5 years later. age of 8 to 10. What do you think? 50? They retested them again 5 years later, ages 13 to 15. You can see a trend here, can't you? Now, this tells an interesting story, because you could have imagined it going the other way, couldn't you? You start off not being very good, but you get better as you get older. But this shows two things. One is we all have this capacity, and two, it mostly deteriorates. Now, a lot of things have happened to these kids as they've grown up. A lot. But one of the most important things that happened to them, I'm convinced, is that by now they've become educated.
Why haven't we fixed this? Those of us in education have held on to a business plan that we don't care how many millions of young people fail. We're going to continue to do the same thing that didn't work. And nobody is getting crazy about it, right? Enough to say enough is enough. So here's a business plan that simply does not make any sense. You know, I grew up in the inner city, and there were kids who were failing in schools 56 years ago when I first went to school. And those schools are still lousy today. 56 years later. And you know something about a lousy school? It's not like a bottle of wine, right? Where you say like 87 was like a good year, right? That's not how this thing, I mean, every single year, it's still the same approach, right? One size fits all. If you get it, fine, and if you don't, tough luck. Just tough luck. Why haven't we allowed innovation to happen? Do not tell me we can't do better than this. Look, you go into a place that's failed kids for 50 years, and you say, so what's the plan? And they say, well, we're going to do what we did last year this year. What kind of business model is that?
The superintendent thinks that every time we're sitting in a seat at school, we are learning, when that's not the case at all. Maybe a third of the time we're actually doing something. And our education system is continually failing us of preparing us for an actual job. It's just pointless, waste of time.
Students are constantly penalized for not performing as well as they should, but what are we performing for? What are we really learning in class that has proven useful in the average career? The problem with our education system is that we do not know the answer to these questions, and we are still being punished for not performing well enough.
The irony. Exams are society's methods of telling you what you're worth, but you can't let society tell you what you are, whether 72 or 88, 44 or 68. We will not let exam results decide our fate.
Students spend countless hours taking practice tests for the ACT in order to get into a good school with scholarship money. She could be spending this time practicing other activities that could potentially earn her more money than these standardized tests. Some students who did choose the athletic route could already be offered a full ride to an institution, like sophomore Cameron Masterman, who hasn't even taken the test yet and is guaranteed money for playing baseball at the University of Louisville. Some students aren't gifted in athletic ability, so they must seek other opportunities for scholarships, such as scoring well on such standardized tests. While most universities claim that they use these tests to put every prospective student on a level playing field, the majority of students receiving athletic scholarships are not expected to reach as high of scores as non-athletes.
For years, college costs have been climbing, largely because demand is outweighing supply. Students continue to apply to the top schools, even when the cost is rising rapidly. Loans have made it possible for students to foot these sky-high bills, and students and families too often overlook the gigantic loan payments students will face after graduation. So as long as students and parents are willing to swallow the cost increases, demand will remain high, and so will prices.
There's a point of diminishing returns in terms of what it's worth for a college education and how much debt you're willing to saddle yourself with. I mean, $40,000 in debt, that's a shitload of money. I don't want $40,000 in debt.
as college graduates struggle under $1 trillion of debt here in the United States. In Germany, they've announced free education entirely in every state of the country.
Have you taken the ACT?
Yes.
Have you taken it more than once?
Yeah, 3 times.
Why'd you take it more than once?
Get a higher score.
Why'd you want to get a higher score?
Get more scholarship money.
The scholarship I needed to go to the school of my choice, I had to get a certain score, so I had to take it many, many times in order to get that score.
Well, I felt like I needed to improve my score because it's just a pretty big determinant of how much money you get in college. I wanted to get my score higher so to get more scholarship money.
Because you have to get that score to get the scholarship that you need to go to college.
Because my score wasn't high enough and I wanted to get a higher score to get scholarships and money.
To get a higher score for the opportunity to get more scholarships.
I wanted a higher chance of getting better scholarships and more money for college.
To get more money for my school.
Scholarship money.
To get money to go to college.
Money. Scholarship money, definitely.
I went to Indiana. I love Indiana. I always recommend going to Indiana. Hoosiers. But the price for out of state has gotten ridiculous.
The culture generally is of free education should be available to all at the higher level if you elect to do that.
In Germany, there was generally free education, but there was a move for a while to start charging a fee to cover a portion of the expenses. And this was up to $600 to $1,000 per year, which even that is very affordable for college education. But there was a pushback against that. The citizens of Germany said we shouldn't have to pay to learn. And so the government acquiesced state by state, and now the entire country has gone this way. Gabriel Hennen-Kajik, the Minister of Science and Culture for Lower Saxony, said this: "We got rid of tuition fees because we do not want higher education, which depends on the wealth of the parents."
Anything that's not an absolute necessity, kids coming out of school today can't spend their money on. And I think that's a real problem for the economy, and I think that bubble is going to burst. And so if any student can, or potential student can borrow more and more money, and it's guaranteed by the federal government, why wouldn't the colleges take it all? But the problem is that bubble has led to over $1 trillion in student loan debt, which is having a significant impact on the economy.
Let's say Congress wanted to do something totally crazy and make all of America's public colleges tuition-free. How much more money do you think Washington would have to spend on higher education? The answer, amazingly, is none. Nada, zilch, $0 extra dollars. That's right, the federal government already spends enough money on financial aid each year to cover the annual tuition bill for every undergraduate and graduate public college student in the country. Skeptical? Let's take a look at the math. Last year, public college students spent $61.8 billion on tuition. That total includes all of the money they received from federal financial aid programs like Pell Grants and Work Study, as well as student loans. Now, how much money does the government spend on financial aid? Happy you asked. In 2014, it is set to dedicate $30.2 billion to grants, which mostly benefit low-income undergrads, about $36.5 billion to tax breaks, which often benefit higher-income students, and nearly $1 billion to Work Study. The grand total? $67.7 billion. More than enough to cover the cost of tuition for every student at each and every public institution in the country, from big state universities all the way down to small community colleges. Of course, to do this, there would have to be some losers. The government would have to stop giving financial aid to students at private schools. But with all due respect to Harvard and Wesleyan, that might not be such a bad idea. You see, today's financial aid system is a bit of a mess. Since the 1980s, states have cut per-student funding for public schools, while the schools themselves have increased spending. To keep up with costs, universities have raised tuition. The federal government then swoops in with more generous grants, tax breaks, and low-interest loans to compensate. The availability of additional financial aid allows states to keep cutting budgets and schools to keep increasing spending, which again leads to higher tuition, all without hurting enrollment, or, in other words, consequences, and so on. Not surprisingly, this system creates an enormous amount of waste. For instance, for-profit colleges, which tend to leave students with lots of debt and not much education to show for it, now consume around 1/5 of all Pell Grant dollars. With about 3/4 of American undergrads attending public colleges already, maybe we should focus on making sure their educations are affordable, rather than giving students just a little bit of money to attend whatever college they want.